Greetings, friends. I'm Rick Tarnas. I'm speaking here from California in the middle of quite a few powerful storms we've been dominated by here over the last 2-3 months. I'm honored to be sharing a few ideas here, perspective on our topic for this conference. And I want to thank the organizers of the conference, and particularly Sangeeta for the invitation. It's a very weighty topic that the conference has set out: designing a new planetary narrative, which means trying to understand our moment in history, trying to understand more deeply our relationship with the planet, with the rest of our fellow animals and plants, and with our whole evolution. And in some sense, this is really the most important topic that we can engage with these days. There's really nothing else that's quite as comparable. We're in a crisis of vision, which affects how we act. It's a worldviews create worlds. They don't just interpret the world. They act upon the world and elicit from reality possibilities and new directions that would otherwise not unfold. And so we have a deep responsibility for what kind of worldview, what kind of cultural vision we carry at any given moment, because it has consequences. It ripples out into the world. And we really, given the nature of our collective situation, which is quite dramatic, we need to get a handle on it, both as individuals on our personal journeys, but also as a species on our collective journey with the entire Earth community, which we human beings, our species, our civilization is having an outsized effect on. We live in an amazing age of the world in so many ways. We all sense the gravity of our time and the urgency and the deeper stirrings in the collective psyche, the turmoil and the ferment in the world, not just the human world, but the entire Earth community and all its members. Such enormously important events with great consequence are unfolding with great speed and with great intensity, increasing speed. The clash of opposing forces, both powerful entrenched forces and powerful forces of change, we witness every day. Old structures are collapsing, and many sense that an age of the world is passing, an old age of the world is passing, as J.R.R. Tolkien might put it. And a kind of sense of moral crisis pervades the air. C.G. Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, he foresaw this, particularly in his later 70s and 80s. Early in my lifetime, he foresaw it with quite vivid insight. He was writing at that time in his later 70s and early 80s with tremendous kind of visionary power and creativity, almost prophetic capacity at that point. I'm thinking of his later works like Answer to Job, Synchronicity, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Ion, Mysterium Conjunctionis. It's something to keep in mind, how creative and lucid a person can be as they as they get older and bring forth, even into their 70s and 80s, bring forth very valuable contributions that we as that the rest of the community could really use. So Jung foresaw this, and he wrote these words. It's in an essay called "The Undiscovered Self." A mood of universal destruction and renewal has set its mark on our age. This mood makes itself felt everywhere, politically, socially, and philosophically. We are, and we might add ecologically, at a level that he could not have anticipated would emerge so quickly. We're living in what the Greeks called the kairos, the right moment for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious human within us who is changing. Coming generations will have to take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science. So much is at stake, and so much depends on the psychological constitution of the modern human. Here, Jung is seeing those deeper archetypal patterns of birth, death, and rebirth at work in contemporary history. And I think we all sense that something like that is happening. Certainly, we all sense that something is dying in our time, and perhaps of something being born. But alas, the dying is often rather more apparent. And because the discouraging vector can be more apparent at times, especially if one gets into a particular well, there's so much happening at once in the world, and you can kind of focus on very positive things that are happening, and that can be very important to do. But we also have to be courageously eyes open about the destruction that's happening too, and the shadow side of our time. And it really takes a kind of balance to hold those two. And this is where having some kind of a larger narrative, glimpsing a greater a meta narrative. I say glimpsing rather than constructing such a narrative, because ultimately I think that any really significant narrative or meta narrative or cultural mythos, if it's going to have any depth and staying power, it really has to be something that emerges out of the deep psyche, out of the anima mundi, the soul of the world. Our own creative agency can play a role, but it cannot just be constructed by our kind of rational constructive powers, kind of like a solution for an engineering problem or something like that. A true mythos, something that is really going to reflect a deep paradigm, that a deep cultural vision, a deep understanding of the unfolding of history, and perhaps of our purposes in life. That has to emerge from something that is coming from very, very deep. It has to have the organic potency of a genuine disclosure, or a kind of almost revelation, though again, we play a role in it. Now, given how huge the topic is and how complex it is as well, any talk like this is going to be ridiculously inadequate to the challenge. We just all of us have to accept the puniness of any one response that we might come up with, that any one of us might come up with. Plus, there's the limitation of any person's vision. We're always seeing to a certain extent through a glass darkly. And this way of putting it isn't false modesty. I think it speaks right to the essence of our evolutionary situation. The evolutionary cosmologist, Brian Swim, my good friend and colleague with whom I've taught at the California Institute of Integral Studies, we've been overseeing and teaching in the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness graduate program for 30 years now. And he acknowledges this kind of seeing through a glass darkly of the current human condition. There's a marvelous passage in his little book on the journey of the universe that he co-wrote with Mary Evelyn Tucker. And as he looked back at the entire history of the Earth and of our species with its highly developed form of reflexive symbolic consciousness, he concluded that the challenge of conscious self-awareness is unlike anything that has occurred for millions of years. We are finding ourselves in the midst of a vast transition. How are we to respond? For we sense we are in a dark night. We dwell in unknowing and yet grope forward. The path is still unclear. What shall we navigate? With what shall we navigate? And he goes on a little bit more. The path is uncertain because our sense of larger purpose and destiny is clouded. We are seeking patterns that connect us to a vaster destiny, a vital participation in the Earth's unfolding. There is nothing more mysterious than destiny of a person, of our species, of our planet, of the universe itself. Now, end of quote from Brian. Now, with that word destiny, Brian Swim is pointing to something beyond the usual language and assumptions that mainstream scientific cosmologists are likely to use. As soon as you use a word like destiny, you're talking about a narrative. In fact, you're talking about a narrative with a moral and spiritual dimension, like a play by Shakespeare or a novel by Jane Austen or a novel, a novel by Leo Tolstoy. Except that here it's more than a human artistic creation. It's rather something that is grounded in the nature of the cosmos itself, and therefore in history. In other words, the destiny of a species, of a planet, of a civilization, of a person. If it's destiny, we play a role in it, but destiny is not something that we just construct out of whole cloth. Deeper purposes and meanings are at work in the nature of things and in our lives. Clearly, both as individuals and as a society, there's a need for this underlying meta-narrative because meta-narratives shape our identity in the most fundamental way. Such a narrative is a frame of reference that kind of grounds our identity, and individuals who really lack that sense of identity, that sense of a narrative identity, that sense of a kind of spiritual horizon within which they orient their lives and direct their activities, and feel that this is valuable, that I should work towards, and this is something I feel I need to outgrow or combat or something like that. Those, if one lacks a framework of values, if one lacks a narrative within which our being is and sense of selfhood is evolving and unfolding, as the psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut and also Charles Taylor, the philosopher, they both point out that someone who goes through that kind of an identity crisis where they feel like they lack that orienting spiritual horizon, that orienting narrative identity, they can actually even lose their physical balance and bearings, like a person whose center of gravity has been kind of taken out from them. And what's true in the individual is also true for the psychology of an entire civilization and a species. And the challenge of our time is that the postmodern era that we're all basically embedded in, it's witnessed the fall of all the traditional meta-narratives, including the modern one of progress, which has clearly been undercut by, yes, there's things that are happening that are progressive, but there's a lot of things that the mythos of progress in modern civilization has wrought that are profoundly destructive and are not very progressive, needless to say, but that have tragic consequences. And so that in some ways the postmodern age that we live in is seeking, is without an orientation, and it's seeking it. We're in a sense more free, more autonomous than that in many ways that are quite new to human history. And at the same time, we're kind of free falling, as Tom Petty put it in his song of that name. I want to set out a strong positive affirmation of the postmodern, because I feel that part of the postmodern is it's important that many of the old narratives and frameworks and paradigms are being questioned, and it's important that we bring critical awareness and open ourselves to new possibilities. And the postmodern is doing that. There's something also about the postmodern that is extremely pluralistic. There are many cultures, many peoples, many species whose voices are being heard and need to be heard. And so this pluralism, the uncertainty and the dissolving of the past and the sense of a search that is so much part of our era. Those are important, and in a sense they're part of our spiritual and moral horizon. So also is the increasing recognition of the soul of the earth, the soul, the moral claims that all of life has on us, that it's not just human beings. Not only is it not just our race or our national people that deserves our moral respect. It's the entire Earth community that deserves it, and there's so many more people alive today that are aware of this and are aware of something like Gaia, that are aware of a soul dimension and an interiority, a subjective sentience in all beings, and that's also part of our postmodern era. So also the openness to shamanic and indigenous wisdom and cultural traditions. There's just so many things that are positive. The feminist awakening, the opening to the importance of ecological, multicultural, feminist, pluralistic, the importance of the imagination and shaping, recognizing it, how much that shapes our rational assessments of things. the unconscious dimension of our lives, of the psyche. These are crucial insights that have emerged over the last decades and emerged and come into wider and wider public awareness. And these are very important. At the same time, the postmodern is clearly it's a crucible of transformation. Let's put it that way. And we don't know what's coming, but I have a few insights that I'd like to share with you. I think we are, as a civilization, going through a kind of great descent, descent, after a long ascent, including the ascent of the modern, the birth of modern man, as it's often was termed, the increasing light of the enlightenment of a particular set of perspectives that were given priority over all others. After that long ascent, many factors are at work now that seem to be constellating a descent. And we can see it expressed in all the arts, popular art as well as high culture art, whether it's apocalyptic themes in films or television series, like Mad Men with the falling advertising executive across all the flashy, glittery images of the Madison Avenue world of New York advertising, and that sense of the fall, or free falling, or how does it feel to be like a Rolling Stone on your own with no direction home? That quality, it's entered in those insights. So that feeling, that gestalt, has shaped both our high culture art and our popular art forms, just as much as our annual State of the World reports, or ever more urgent warnings from concerned scientists about the state of the world. All of those are carrying the same sense of sensitivity to a vector of descent in our time. And what I want to argue is that that descent is extremely important for us to not just recognize, but in some sense embrace, because it's in the descent that we are transformed. It's in the crucible of the underworld journey that we are go through a kind of death and rebirth, and the possibility of entering into a new relationship with the larger community of life, but with a much deeper center that is not only centered in our own private skin encapsulated ego, but that specialness comes instead from the much greater whole of the WHOLE of the earth, of the cosmos, of the community of life, and how we each individually flower is indeed very, very special indeed. And just as the earth outside my window has flowered into that redwood tree, or that magnolia in front, or that squirrel that's going along the ridge there in the backyard, or the birds that are outside, each of those is an individual flowering of their own, in their own uniqueness, and each of us is as well. But at the same time, the specialness is rooted in the larger all of nature and the whole cosmos and the earth, and it's not self-contained in that kind of isolation chamber that the modern ego has kind of created for itself, as if we were self-made our, as if our greatness totally came out of our own constructions instead of it being, in some sense, our intelligence, our imagination is the universe's intelligence and the universe's imagination and the universe's creativity. Those are all flowing through us. Excuse me. So I'd like to suggest that the state of free falling, what others have called the great unraveling, the great turning, the great descent, this is a dying to an old identity, to an old meta-narrative, and it's accompanied by great uncertainty and a disorientation about the future, but it is also critical to a larger unfolding process that all of us in the human community are and the Earth community are participating in. There are deep meanings here, larger forces and purposes that are at work. Friedrich Nietzsche in Thus Spoke Zarathustra has a beautiful poetic sentence where he says, "The world is deep, deeper than day can comprehend." The world is deep, deeper than day can comprehend. We need more than day. We need day and night. We need the insights coming from from the depths, from when we look out at the night sky, we see the deep cosmos. We see the many stars, the many truths, the deep whole, the wide expanse of the whole cosmos. While during the day, with that one light of the sun, we see things very clearly, but we're in a more limited universe, and everything's very differentiated and so forth. We need both day and night. And in some ways, that synthesis of mind and soul is what is most called upon from all of us right now. So the great paradox that I want us all to contemplate here is, how is it that in certain respects, and certainly in its own estimation, this most brilliant species, Homo sapiens, this most brilliant civilization, modern civilization, this or Western civilization, let's say, has so shaped the modern, and this brilliant era that we were born into, and the modern era generally. How is it that all this brilliance has produced the tremendous catastrophe that the Earth is now going through? What is it about the modern mind and modern self that's so intrinsic to who each of us is, and to our entire civilization? What is it that has separated? What is it about this modern identity that has separated itself from the whole of life so unprecedentedly that it has begun to crash the entire Cenozoic era? And the basic thesis that I want to share with you in my time with you now is that so many of the most central, distinctive features of our contemporary situation bear an uncanny resemblance to initiatory rites of passage, which in turn you can see as parallel to what Jung regarded as the individuation process, certain critical stages of that, to Joseph Campbell's ideas of the great descent that happens as part of the journey of the hero, the dark night of the soul in spiritual crises that can occur, near-death experiences, what Stan Grof has called the powerful perinatal level of the unconscious, where the death rebirth archetypal experience lies, and that can erupt in what he calls spiritual emergencies. All of these conditions, all of these, what I would regard as some of the most outstanding features of our time that are especially urgent, especially critical conditions. They reflect classic facets of an initiatory ritual process of transformation in its various stages. Could be in ritual form. It could be in an individual spiritual journey that just unfolds in the course of life. So I want to just share with you 12 basic conditions or features that I recognize as being both characteristic of our time and the sensibility of many thoughtful people today. And at the same time, these are features of initiatory rites of passage. So one is that sense that I started with, that sense of groping in the darkness, of ignorance, of not knowing, that sense of metaphysical uncertainty that we have, that is connected to a deep uncertainty about the future. How is it going to turn out? What is it going to be like 20 years from now, let alone 50 or 100 or 1,000 years from now? Second, a perception of encroaching danger. Climate change being the most evident, but it's also in the air, in the political world, in the geopolitical world, and in many other aspects of life, but certainly the global one of climate change and the extinction of species and biodiversity is just a huge looming danger and already in process. Third, a collapse, a dying of an old identity. Here on the collective human level, a kind of identity crisis of modern man. Fourth, a sense of a dethroning of that old identity and a kind of decentering ever since Copernicus and the Earth not being the center, and then Darwin, Homo sapiens is not the center, and then the usual list, Freud's psychoanalysis and the rational ego is not master of its own house, but has is an epiphenomenon of the id and so forth. And then fifth, there's that widespread sense of spiritual and moral disorientation that I was talking about. Sixth, the sense of an encompassing existential crisis that has physical and metaphysical dimensions. Stan Groff talks about it using Edgar Allan Poe's title of a long short story, The Descent into the Maelstrom, which is part of the perinatal journey and of the baby being born and the entrance into the full labors of birth. But it's also very characteristic of us on a kind of existential level today. There's also sometimes there's a sense that the world's going insane, or that we're going mad, or a loss of sure grasp of what's real. That and the pervasive insincerity, inauthenticity, unfounded statements, propaganda, fake news, disinformation, all those are in the air as well, and it's very characteristic of that sense of everything is uncertain and been destabilized. Even the sense of truth. And then ninth, there's a sense of suffering on many levels, spiritual, ecological. There's a deep sense of alienation or estrangement or isolation, both individuals feeling it, but also the human condition. Then there's the encounter with the moral shadow. Many people go through in the spiritual journey part of the dark night of the souls, confronting their own shadow, like seeing what they have done earlier in life and seeing it with a new light as to how it affected somebody, or if I'd been more aware, more conscious, more empathic, I wouldn't have said or done that with this hurtful consequence. But there can be really deep encounter with the shadow that takes place in such a in such a spiritual journey and initiatory journey, but it's clearly happening in our time. I mean, is there any, like, every major religion, its shadow is more apparent than at any time before of our civilization, modern civilization. Its shadow, the shadow of patriarchy, the shadow of extreme wealth, the shadow of white racism, and so for all these shadows of that were kept in the unconscious, kept out of sight for so long, except for those who are on the receiving end. Now those are emerging, that sense of really having to confront it. And that's a big part of what wokeness is, which can obviously become as a new form of kind of self-righteous puritanical judgment and readiness to be offended at any moment. But it also is an authentic spiritual process of expanding our range of. I like what Sarah Silverman said. What's wokeness? Well, doesn't it have something to do with empathy, recognition that others who are not as fortunate may as I am might be suffering? What else she say? She said, I think it didn't have something to do with what Jesus was teaching. That's Sarah Silverman, the great comic, and wise person in her own way. Then the last thing is the 12th feature is that sense of encountering our mortality. Facing death is the big challenge for every one of us as individuals, but we're facing it now on a planetary scale. The mortality of species, the mortality of our own species or of our form of life. It's a big one. So all these familiar features of the traditional rite of passage, because these are the things that one encounters with the rite of passage, they seem to be playing out on the collective level of human evolution, except that instead of being separated from the tribe, from the ritual, instead of being separated from the mothers, being isolated and put through this intense process, we, as a collective, modern Homo sapiens, we find ourselves separated out from the entire community of being itself, from the entire ensouled cosmos, from the anima mundi, like the Cartesian isolated I think, therefore I am rational ego, the buffered self, as Charles Taylor calls it. It's we separated ourselves out from the rest of the animate universe and its carrying of meanings outside of us and purposes outside of us. We live in this or at least the initiated modern mind lives in a world in which the human being is convinced that only humans possess conscious intelligence, purpose, spiritual and moral capacities, and interiority and so forth, rather than all of these qualities being elements of the entire cosmos, and that we are the cosmos in human form, and our interiority, our spiritual and intellectual capacities are the cosmos's capacities as inflected and evolving through us. So that kind of self-isolating move was part, I believe, of almost like setting in motion an initiatory process, much as when the tribal elders take aside when at the right time, take aside the young, either individual or a whole group of young members of the tribe, and separate them out, and then start putting them through their ordeals of transformation. And of course, in our current case, collectively, all of us, elders and young people alike, we're all swept up in this tremendous global process we're in. The elders are not calmly standing in watch from outside the initiatory drama, as might be happening in an indigenous tribal ritual. We're all in it. And yet, our accumulated experiences, and I'm speaking to many of you here listening, perhaps all of you listening today, our accumulated experiences of initiatory awakenings and transformations that each of us and all of us together have gone through in the course of our lives, we can each, to that extent, play a role in how we participate in the collective drama of our time, and perhaps help hold we can perhaps hold a place of equilibrium, that kind of spiritual centeredness that can often emerge as one comes out of this tremendous initiatory, perinatal, individuating, death, rebirth, spiritual transformation. I want to share with you a passage here from Joseph Campbell. Was giving a lecture quite a few years ago, where he was 1970 at Esalen Institute, and I want to share with you his account of an actual initiation that was recorded over a century earlier, just so we can get a sense for a little bit more tangible what we're talking about here. This was the Greenland-born Danish explorer and anthropologist Knud Rasmussen, and he was exploring the northern part of the North American continent in the early, turn of the 20th century and early 20th century, and he had conversations with a number of old shamans as he was moving through the northern part of the continent. And one of these shamans told him the story of his own initiation when he was a young boy. And he said he was taken by an older shaman out on a sled over ice and placed in a small igloo, just big enough for him to sit in, crouched on a skin, and an animal skin, and he was left there for 30 days with a little water and meat being brought in to him twice during that period. And this elderly shaman, who now is talking about when he was very young, he said, I died a number of times during those 30 days, but I learned and found what can be learned and found only in the silence, away from the multitude, in the depths. I heard the voice of nature itself speak to me, and it spoke with the voice of a gentle motherly solicitude and affection. Or it sounded sometimes like children's voices, or sometimes like falling snow. And what it said was, do not be afraid of the universe. This discovery that the young boy went through, of finding this kind of point of absolute security inside, existential spiritual security that was inside him, made possible his return to his community with a wisdom and an assurance that was unmatched by anyone else there, so that he could help others from that inner place. Now, how might we support an initiatory transformation for our civilization? One, of course, is to explore and enter into such sacred rituals ourselves on a personal level, whether it's wilderness vision quests or ayahuasca ceremonies or psychedelic therapy or breath work or any of the various meditative practices. Of course, just giving birth to children and raising children is an initiatory transformational process in itself. And facing the many challenges and crises of life and the deaths of those in our lives, all those play a role. They challenge us to go through transformations, and they can serve as initiatory thresholds. And there's also the need for expanding our capacity to listen to the voice of nature, to listen to the voice of our deep psyche through our dreams, visions, images, symbolic through our art, our creativity. Our capacity to listen to the anima mundi, the soul of the world. This requires a kind of expanding of our ways of knowing, our epistemologies, so that we can open ourselves to the epistemologies of the heart, rather than just that narrow empiricism and narrow rationalism that has defined modern knowledge. Just to an extreme, and to move beyond that as what's recognizing the real, to those modes of knowing that involve our imaginative and intuitive capacities, our empathic and relational capacities, our moral and spiritual imagination. Excuse me. Our emotional and somatic capacities, our ability that gives us, the capacity for symbolic discernment, for bringing creatively together the scientific and the poetic, the spiritual and the rational. A synthesis of rigor and imagination, as my friend and teacher from many years ago, Gregory Bateson, said. Rigor and imagination, two crucial terms. And this is what would allow us to move from an I-it relationship to the world to an I-thou relationship to the world. And that's really what's crucial. Now, all those are things we can do. And at the same time, amidst the great challenges of our time, I believe that initiatory transformation that we can serve, it's also just happening on its own with great spontaneous force for all of humanity right now, for our planet. I want to share with you here a few words from my wonderful colleague and friend, Joanna Macy. She has a few words to say about what we can do at such a time. First, come from gratitude. To be in, I'm quoting now from Joanna, to be alive in this beautiful self-organizing universe, to participate in the dance of life with senses to perceive it, lungs that breathe it, organs that draw nourishment from it. It is a wonder beyond words. Gratitude for the gift of life is the primary wellspring of all religions, the hallmark of the mystic, the source of all true art. Furthermore, it is a privilege to be alive in this time when we can choose to take part in the self-healing of our world. Then she says, don't be afraid of the dark. This is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty, she says. Like living cells in a larger body, it is natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel or the anger or fear, for these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. To suffer with is the literal meaning of compassion. Then she says, out of this darkness, a new world can arise, not to be constructed by our minds so much as to emerge from our dreams. Even though we cannot see clearly how it's going to turn out, we are still called to let the future into our imagination. We will never be able to build what we have not first cherished in our hearts. Two more points she makes. Roll up your sleeves. Many people don't get involved in the great turning, as she calls it, because there are so many different issues which seem to compete with each other. Shall I save the whales or help battered children? The truth is that all aspects of the current crisis reflect the same mistake, setting ourselves apart and using others for our gain. It's that part of which the modern mind has kind of honed to an extreme, this capacity for rational payoff calculations, and rather than learning to not use others for our gain, as if that short-term payoff calculation is really a worthwhile basis to live a life on. Getting back to Joanna. So to heal one aspect of this crisis helps the others to heal as well. Just find what you love to work on and take joy in that. Never try to do it alone. Link up with others. You'll spark each other's ideas and sustain each other's energy. And finally, she says, act your age. Since every particle in your body goes back to the first flaring forth of space and time, i.e., 14 billion years ago, you're really as old as the universe. So when you are lobbying at your congressperson's office, or visiting your local utility, or testifying at a hearing on nuclear waste, or standing up to protect an old grove of redwoods, you are doing that not out of some personal whim, but in the full authority of your 14 billions of years. Okay. I want to link this. I have a couple more things to say during my hour with you. One is the idea of heroic communities. This idea of not doing it alone, linking up with others, brings to my mind something that I feel is an important aspect of our situation. I've spoken elsewhere about the idea of heroic communities and their crucial role in the postmodern world, this crucible of transformation we're in, where the old horizon of meaning has been lost and the potential for a new one is emerging. By heroic, I mean communities that are oriented toward a framework of values or a vision of the true and the good, which fundamentally challenges the vision of the larger mainstream community or society or civilization. So the heroic is, by this definition, it's the capacity to hold to a higher vision of the good, even when you're not surrounded by in a civilization that sees that as the obvious right thing to do, the right vision to hold. We we need to have community, individuals, the individual hero, individual heroic human being. That was very much forged over the last several thousand years in our civilization and our species. But we absolutely need to have communities that can together sustain the enormous act of the spiritual and intellectual imagination and dedication that can really vivify and co-creatively participate in the reawakening of a meaningful cosmology and narrative for our civilization. There are many diverse heroic communities that are carrying their special task in our time. They can be local or they could be non-local, global. They can be educational communities, learning communities, or activist communities. Could be communities like California Institute of Integral Studies, where I teach, or our philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness graduate program, where Brian Swim and I and Joanna Macy, Stan Groff, a number of other great teachers have been part of over these 30 years. That's one, but there's so many. I mentioned, Stan Groff was a big part of that. But there's Findhorn, there's Schumacher College, there's Damanhur in Italy, there's all the Jungian societies, the astrological societies and associations, or Bioneers, great organization, or Esalen Institute, or Omega Institute, or Hollyhock. There's just so many beyond counting that are heroic communities, and we need those. It's not just that communities, because they may carry a coherent vision, they can enhance our own vision and amplify the ripples outward of our own individual efforts. That's true. But also communities can hold space for each individual to go through the inner journey, which is often very challenging emotionally and every other way, to kind of hold space for all the individuals within it to go through their journeys in the course of our lives. So a heroic community must be and I see everyone that is tuned into this summit is an example of such a community, and then you have other communities that you're personally participating in of the kinds that I'm talking about here. And ideally, such a community is a supporting matrix for the individual flowering of each person in it. It's not like the kind of community that brings a kind of dogmatic unity of a cult. It has to be a container that is porous to the outside world and is constantly taking in what is valuable from the outside world and bringing forth what is valuable from inside the community. But at the same time, that it's a container for the unfolding each in its individual differentiated way of each member in the community. So it supports the individuality of those in the community rather than suppresses it. That's very important for our time. So we can't play our part in this process alone, but beyond our human communities, it's ultimately the community of the earth and of the cosmos itself that we must turn to and open up to. I believe it is the vast cosmos of the meaningful, meaning-laden, purpose-laden cosmos that initiatory rituals can open us up to, and that noble wisdom traditions coming from indigenous societies, coming from esoteric traditions like astrology, mystical practices, all these can help open us to and reveal the cosmos as bearing, I believe, a certain care for the earth, and for each individual and for each moment. You see that with astrological birth charts, transits, the world transits, the fact that the planets are moving and at the same time they are seen to be in this kind of microcosm, macrocosm relationship, as above, so below, with the archetypal patterns of human experience with such nuanced precision and consistency. It suggests that there's this constant sort of flow of meaning from the greater solar system and cosmos, bathing our Earth with a kind of care, a care of meaning, and helping us live more skillfully, but also helping us realize that we are part of a larger whole that is profoundly intelligent, beyond our wildest ability to encompass it by our personal brain, and all these can help us, I think, go through this planetary crisis and threshold of transformation as a kind of initiation into the larger ensouled universe, where we can return to the community of life as a co-creative participant in a mystery that is unfolding, a larger evolving mystery that we're part of. We're not an isolated oddity, speck of consciousness in a random, vast, unconscious universe. We're not like this meaning-seeking little speck of dust in the vast cosmic void. We're participants in something much greater, a cosmos of a deep cosmos of vast meaning and purpose. And when we can find that ground of trust in the universe, and it becomes a ground for hope as well, that plays a role in shaping the future, then we could perhaps, as individuals and as communities, all of us can start playing a more effective role. We can serve as kind of subtly healing and centering presence for the larger human community, as we all go through what is undoubtedly going to be a dramatic next few decades. Let me end here with the beautiful words of Václav Havel, the great Czech dissident who was imprisoned by the communists in Prague, and then he was a playwright and a philosopher. But then after the Velvet Revolution, he was immediately elected to become the president of Czechoslovakia. He came here to California almost 30 years ago, 1994, 29 years ago, and gave a lecture here at Stanford. And he said these words: "Planetary democracy does not yet exist, but our global civilization is already preparing a place for it. It is the very earth we inhabit, linked with heaven above us. Only in this setting can the mutuality and the commonality of the human race be newly created, with reverence and gratitude for that which transcends each of us and all of us together." And then he ends with these words: "The authority of a world democratic order simply cannot be built on anything else but the revitalized authority of the universe." That's Václav Havel, and that's the end of my time with you. And I hope that something of what I have shared with you will be of use as you carry forward with each of you doing pursuing the extraordinary journeys that each of you are on, and that brought you to this conference and has you participating in a larger evolving mystery. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.